personally think pies are super underrated. Make a pie crust, you can use up some really cheap in-season fruit or just turn it into some savory dishes. Today I'm going to show you how to make pie crust right at home from scratch for a fraction of price. G'day guys, how's it going? Welcome back to Sam's Home Kitchen. My name is Sam Lin. I am a home cook who's really passionate about sustainability and more importantly, save money by making things at home, and hopefully I can help you guys do the same in your own kitchen as well. So this week's video, we're going to go through how to make pie crust at home. Pies in general, I personally think it's so underrated. Whenever I have a family dinner going on that I have to bring something, if there's a lack of dessert, I always put my hand up to make an apple pie or pear pie. Those fruits are super meaty, super cheap, but when you just wrap it up in some really nice pie crust, that is a treat for everyone. In terms of pie crust, it's really not that complicated. It's consisted of a few main ingredients: flour, butter, water, salt, sugar if you're making sweet pie, and that really is it. It's not rocket science, exactly what we're going to go through today, and by making it at home, it will save you so much money. Before we jump into the recipe, if you can, smash the like button down over here. That would really help out with my YouTube videos and channels. Thank you so much for doing that, and let's get into it. Today we're making some pie crust right at home. The ingredient list is going to be really straightforward, short and sweet. We're starting off with some plain flour. We'll need some icy cold water, but more on this later. Next, we'll want some butter. You can substitute butter with fat that will solidify in the fridge. Vegan butter can be used here for vegan pastry. Next, we've got some salt to season our pie crust. And last but not least, optionally, you can add in sugar if you're making some sweet pies. I've got the ingredient ratio listed on the screen. Rather than giving you the exact measurement, depending on the size of the baking tray, the amount of pastry you will need is going to vary, so make your own judgment. These are all pantry items and so easily available at shops. Give this recipe a try and trust me, you will love it. We'll put these aside and get started. First of all, we're going to start with our butter. You might be thinking why my butter looks like something someone smuggled with Let's not get there. This is butter that I churned from some reduced cream. It's a great way to make some cheap butter and buttermilk at home. I'm sure there will be a video on this in the future, but regular butter sticks will work just fine. First thing first, I'm intending to use half of this butter, so I'm working with the scale as always. Here, I've got 240 grams of butter, so half of that is 120 grams. By figuring out the weight of butter, I'll know how much flour is needed as our recipe calls for 1:1 butter to flour ratio. We'll unwrap the butter and just cut it in half to get out 120 grams of butter. Put the rest of the butter away in the fridge, kids. It's getting warm here in Brisbane and you don't want that to be melting. With our butter, next we're going to cut it in cubes. We want something around 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter size. These butter cubes are going to help create the layers in our pie crust later on. Transfer them into a bowl or just leave them on the chopping board if you're not going to be cutting anything else. Next, we're going to measure out the same amount of flour in weight as butter. So in this case, we need 120 grams of flour. Now, we've got our flour and butter, it's time to combine them together. With our butter cubes in the bowl, we're going to first toss them and cover them with flour so they don't stick or melt in our hands. Get your hand in and scoop it in deep into the flour and toss the butter cubes in directly with flour. Once they are fully coated with flour, they become much easier to work with. We want to gently break them down into smaller pieces. To create some layers in our pie crust, I use my fist to gently flatten our butter into sheets. It is very important not to overwork your butter. It's the big and small chunks of butter, the imperfection and inconsistency that makes our pastry authentic. Once the butter cubes are broken down, it's time to add in some icy cold water. It's very important to use cold water here as we are working with butter and we want it to stay as solid as possible, otherwise we could have just used some liquid oil, right? So here, we want half the weight of flour in water, which is 60 grams. Once water is in, we want to get our hand back in and mix it through. Be very mindful not to overwork the dough, as we want our pastry to be flaky, not chewy. And we don't want to melt the butter in the dough by touching it too much. I also added a pinch, about 5 grams of salt here for seasoning. I used the back of my fingers to press the dough down to minimize heat transfer and push the dough together. As mentioned earlier, the key to an authentic pie crust is the inconsistency. It's the not so well combined speckles of butter that makes it so tasty. We're not after a smooth dough here. Now, the dough is roughly combined, we're going to put it away in the fridge to rest up the gluten and let the butter firm up. To prevent the dough from drying out, I'm using some cling wrap that I saved from past food purchases. I tend to save the plastic wrap that is not so dirty yet to give it a second or third life. Reusable silicone freezer bags are also perfect for this. I avoid buying overpackaged items these days, but when it makes no economic sense to do so, I repurpose what I can to reduce the environmental impact I have. Put our dough in the cling wrap. Use a spatula to scrape clean our bowl. It takes 2 seconds to get them all out. Don't be lazy and just wash them down the drain. Wrap our dough in the cling wrap. It's normal if the dough is kind of dry and falling apart. Use the plastic wrap to push them together, and the dough will redistribute the moisture while resting in the fridge. Pop it in the fridge for at least an hour and just let the time do its thing. Once the resting time is up, roll out a baking sheet on your work surface. Dust the baking sheet with flour to prevent our dough from sticking. You can see the rested dough speckled with butter throughout. Put the dough on our baking paper and dust the top and the rolling pin with some more flour. To roll the dough out, some pressing motion can help spreading it out at the initial stage. Don't be stingy with your flour and make sure you dust the dough throughout the process to prevent it from sticking. In the rolling process, I folded the dough in for about 3 times in total to create some layers in the pastry. If you're wanting to bake the pie crust right away, now is a good time to go turn your oven on and preheat the oven at 200 degrees Celsius on fan forced. Last step is to roll the dough out to the desired size to cover the base of our baking vehicle. I've been using my cast iron pan as a baking mold for pies for a while now. If you don't own a pie dish, give it a try, it's pretty good. To transfer the dough into the pan, grab our rolling pin and we want to roll our pastry over the rolling pin, and it should be easily lifted. Shift it over to our pan and unwrap the pastry over it. It's nice and straightforward. Make sure our pastry is nice and relaxed in the pan and cover all of the corners and edges. Trim off the excess and we can use the offcuts to patch any edges that need extra pastry. Once that's all done, we're going to use the technique called blind baking. We're essentially going to bake our crust while weighing down the middle section so it stays nice and dense instead of puffing up. I'm using the baking sheet here, and honestly, it's not an Asian household without rice, which is what I'm going to use here. Some dry beans will also do the trick. I'm putting a couple of cups of rice in the middle, just enough to cover the flat base just to weigh it down. Alfoil can be used as a substitute of baking sheets here. Once it's all prepped up, we'll pop it in the oven for 15 minutes. Once 15 minutes is up, we'll take the pie crust out of the oven. Remove our baking sheet with rice, and the pastry should be about halfway cooked. Put it back in the oven and cook until golden brown. One thing I forgot to film is that I poked some holes in the flat base of the crust to let the steam out so the base can stay flat. Thank you for watching until the end. Got some pastry ASMR here for you. The cost breakdown is as below. 120 grams of flour at $1 per kilo equals to 12 cents. 120 grams of butter at $1.12 per 100 grams equals to $1.34. 5 grams of salt at $1 per kilo equals to 5 cents. Altogether, our pie crust costs us $1.47 to make. A quick Google search tells me I'm easily saving 50 to 80% if you were to be buying some pre-made store-bought crap. Alright guys, we've got our pie crust done. It's so simple to make. It does take a little bit of time for the dough to rest, to rehydrate and whatnot. But the list of ingredients is super straightforward. It's everyday item that you have in the fridge, in the pantry. And this crust is super versatile. Like I said, put in some apple, put in some pear, and that is a mouth-watering fruit tart done. And you can also use this as a quiche base and then make it a really nice flaky exterior to hold all of your eggy goodies. So this pie crust, if you can hear it, alright, this I did not have to touch it, came straight out of the oven and it's already loose. It's so easy. It's a joy. If you do notice on the bottom of the pie, I did poke a few holes just because when I put it back in there, it started to bubble and started to lift from our pan. So I poked a few holes just to let the steam out. It stayed as flat as it should be. So today's video is a short one. I hope you enjoyed it. It's these small things, everyday items that you can do just right in your kitchen rather than having to go and buy. Buying is one thing, but also the plastic packaging, the wastage, the postage, the fuel, the shipment of all these different goods, that is really, in my opinion, quite unnecessary when you can just make a much better version of this at home with cheaper price and cutting out all of the carbon footprint and everything that modern consumerism is having a really, really big impact on our planet at the moment. So yeah, if you do enjoy the video, please make sure you give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. I have a new video coming out on a weekly basis. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you in the next one.